Hey, what is going on, everybody out there? This is Jakejames Lugo. Welcome to the channel, and welcome to a brand new episode of my Definitive Discussion Rebooted show, where I bring on phenomenal individuals from all over the place, the internet, gaming, and all this stuff. We talk about some fun stuff. So let me know if you guys have been enjoying the show so far, all the different episodes. Again, I had Richard Epcar, the voice of Raiden, the voice of Ansem, and a whole bunch of other great anime and gaming characters not too long ago. You guys got to check out that episode, okay? Let me know in the comments if you guys have been enjoying all the guests, and give me suggestions, too, of who you guys want to see on the show. But today, I got two very special guests. My first pair, they come as a package deal over here on the show. I have Isaac and I have Ashley. They are content creators for the Dungeon Masters Guild. They are big Dungeons and Dragons fan. That's what we're talking about today. We're talking about D&D. So Isaac, Ashley, my friends, what's good? How you been?
We're good.
We're good, yeah. Had a happy holiday. Have been busy in a number of projects, as is kind of our lives. But if you don't have work going as a freelancer, then that's a problem.
Well, that's cool, though. At least you got a good holiday season, because we're recording this for everybody listening now. We're recording this right after Christmas, like the day after. Okay, so you had a good holiday. That's all cool. But you two are huge Dungeons & Dragons fans, huge D&D fans. And every time I've gone to the last couple conventions, specifically LumiCon this year and last year, I saw you guys working very hard. You guys were running pretty much the entire tabletop gaming section, which is actually pretty cool. I mean, how was that? Was that fun, like, overall?
We were running half of the tabletop room. TJ was running the other half with all the board games, card games, all that great stuff, whereas we were handling the Dungeons and Dragons side of the realm.
Yeah, we had full content running all weekend long, 3 days of the convention, several different games running, also organizing a lot of other panels. That's one thing we're very excited about, because Dungeons and Dragons is a multifaceted hobby. And very complex. There's so many things you can do and so many different ways you can approach it, both as a player and a creator.
Yeah, I saw some of the panels. Like, I walked in, between both years, I was like all over the place covering the con, and I walked in a few times at some of the panels and some of the little like workshops you guys were doing within that gaming room, and I thought that was pretty cool because you guys had a crowd. I know I saw there was a lot of people sitting down to play D&D, or at least, go over like different stuff. Like, I didn't sit for the entire time, so I didn't get the context of it. But it looked like it was a lot of fun. Like, I saw a lot of figures and different like setups and stuff, for the tables and such. That looked pretty cool overall. Like, when you guys get to do stuff like that at cons, like, does it add like a whole nother depth of appreciation for the, the fandom of like D&D, like, all the stuff you get involved with?
It really does. When we play Dungeons & Dragons week to week, we are playing with our circle of friends. And you kind of get a certain, this is how we play, this is our style, this is the way we choose to role play. And then when we get to go to a convention, we get to meet other people. And I said hi to you for the first time 5 minutes ago, and now we're playing together. Yeah. And I'm getting a totally different feel for how different people like to play and how they like to interact. And it gives me a much bigger impression of just kind of the world of Dungeons and Dragons on the whole.
Yeah, it really does fall in that line of different strokes for different folks. Like I said, there's so many ways to approach it. And we had players who were playing for their first time, and we had players who've been playing for 40 plus years sitting at our table.
That's pretty cool. Again, that's a cool blending of, old and new, or like noob and like master, not really master, but adept like fandoms and stuff. And I can relate a little bit to it, as someone that's just more into the digital realm with gaming and such, but there's a lot of parallels between both fandoms like that. So speaking of, okay, as the resident D&D noob in this call right now, because I am a noob, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people out there also noobs that aren't really, familiar with a lot of aspects of D&D. One of the things that I really appreciate about Dungeons & Dragons is the artwork. All the different illustrations and the different types of like, visual material that you see with a lot of like the different supplemental compendiums and like the different guides and stuff that get related to people that play actively Dungeons & Dragons. And one of the big things that happened recently that I got to check out was the Art and Artifacts book for Dungeons & Dragons from, I believe it was from Wizard World, the same guys that also do Magic the Gathering and all this other stuff. And I love the artwork that I get to see and all the different visual material from all those different like guides and editions for D&D. Like, I think right now you guys are up to 5th edition, I think, at the current moment, something like that.
That is
like,
5th.
Seeing all the different stuff with that, and even going back to years and years ago. So I believe it's the 40s, if not before the 40s. Like, stuff like that you see the evolution of like some of the same creatures that have become iconic now at this point, and really have impacted other forms of like role-playing games, especially digital role-playing games and even Japanese role-playing games. It's pretty insane. I mean, for you guys who actively play the game, does that add like any other like, level of appreciation or any other like interesting stuff for you guys as fans that actually play this stuff?
So something that's very important about Dungeons & Dragons is the evolution of things. And it's been around now since the 70s in full force. But before that, there were other pen and paper games, tabletop games that used similar storytelling methods. Dungeons and Dragons started very heavily into the art when the monster manuals had come out.
Yeah.
That was something you started seeing a lot more illustrations because it was very hard to give paragraph by paragraph descriptions of what a monster looked like and very easy to just draw it. Yeah. So there are certain things in Dungeons and Dragons, specific trademarks that are theirs now. If we talk about things like mind flayers or
beholders. For anybody that knows about Stranger Things, I know the mind flayer is a big thing now with like.
That's very familiar.
Oh yeah. So then there's a whole big like discussion about Dungeons and Dragons. I think in the first season. So there's a lot of stuff with the '80s kids that are familiar with that.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things that I think is incredible is when you watch the start to finish from where we are now. There's so much more inclusivity in Dungeons and Dragons, especially if you go through, you grab your player's handbook, you start flipping through. The first thing you see when you flip to the fighter page is you see a POC fighter. You see someone with dark skin who's got braided hair, and then you flip the page a little more, you see someone who looks like they're of Asian descent. You see women. And this is something that's come out in the last, probably since 5th edition. They've really started to kind of open this idea up of it's fantasy, it's for everybody.
So let me ask you really quickly about that. Was that always by design? Because I remember, again, going back to the book that I referenced before, which is Art and Artifacts, I still see some elements of that in some of the older editions, way before 5th edition. But, I mean, obviously, since this is fantasy, some of the earlier conceptions of fantasy were like stuff like Conan the Barbarian, and a little bit much more, a lot of the characters and a lot of the people in there were Caucasian, even though they could be applied to all types of genders, all types of races and stuff. Was it still by design for D&D to be so inclusive, even though, again, there's a little more emphasis now?
So you have to remember that Dungeons and Dragons in its original conception was designed by a lot of white guys in the Midwest. So of course, when they designed their heroes looked like them because most people want to project themselves into a game. And as the game has grown and evolved, it has reached out to more people. More people have become involved, and as fewer and fewer of the creators and the writers and the artists are white guys, you start seeing more characters that look like more different things. Sure. And you see, it used to be that all the female characters were the sexy sorceress or in bikini chainmail, and now you're seeing the female rogue in a full suit of armor, of leather armor, or in heavy plate mail for a female paladin. You're also there's actually something that we as writers of Dungeons & Dragons content refer to, and it's a style guide that is actually published by Wizards of the Coast. And part of what they focus on is things like, here's how you format this text. But another thing that they talk about is the fact that the realms, the Forgotten Realms, are multicultural. And one of the things they acknowledge is we have not always succeeded in our representation of these things. The Sun Elves, which some people think of as just high elves, are in their earliest descriptions as having bronze or dark skin and light hair. And there were a lot of early art pictures that showed them as being very pale with blonde hair. And you're starting to go back to the core again, where they're going like, no, these were supposed to have darker skin and blonde hair. So they're trying to go back into that thing of, okay, we need to look at the way we originally described things, and we need to make sure that the art is correct for the description, and we also need to make sure that there is more variety and make sure that more people are represented, because it's not just one person's fantasy, it's everybody's fantasy.
Yeah, which is a great thing, especially now these days where diversity and inclusivity is more of a talking point than it was in the past. Again, it's not a bad talking point, but now there's a little bit more emphasis on it, to at least, get an idea of like the world building, the community building, I think, which is a very important aspect of that. That's something very cool. Now, I want to ask you both, again, even though you're more familiar with the tabletop gaming aspect of Dungeons and Dragons and stuff, but again, I come from the realm of the digital entertainment, which is just gaming and such, playing a lot of role-playing games, either Western role-playing games, which really has a lot more familiarity with Dungeons and Dragons, as well as also Japanese role-playing games, which was heavily influenced like it. Perfect example, Final Fantasy, the very first Final Fantasy games, or even Dragon Quest. There was a lot of inspiration from older editions of D&D that you could see in a lot of the monsters and a lot of the other aspects of it. Do you think that some of the different characteristics of older Dungeons and Dragons, or even up to 5th edition now, really impacted a lot of gaming, specifically role-playing games, for the better? Or is there like certain things that you feel like haven't translated well between the mediums?
So I'm going to talk about my favorite game. It's a game called Dragon's Dogma.
Ooh, that's a good one. Nice.
Yeah, it's made by Capcom, and specifically, it was made by the fighting games / Devil May Cry team. So it's a very action heavy,
Very true.
role playing game. And one of the most amazing things about it is how unabashed they are about stealing directly from Dungeons and Dragons.
It's not a beholder.
Isn't that a good thing, though?
It's not a beholder. It's an evil eye
or a gazer,
gazer. There you go.
It's a giant eyeball with multiple
Final
eye
Fantasy
stars.
has the same thing. Final Fantasy is
Absolutely.
the exact same thing.
Well, the thing is, you had a lot of the early, like the role-playing game writers in Japan, they looked at these things and they thought, oh, these are fantasy monsters in the West. They didn't realize they were designed for D&D. They just thought...
Some of them played.
Yeah.
I remember reading about it in like older, like, reference material and stuff, that some of the older developers and the people that came up with like Final Fantasy 1 and 2, they played actively D&D just to get an idea of like the Western audience like mentality when it comes to games.
Plus, you've got anime, actually, that are completely based off D&D campaigns. Record of Lotus War.
Slayers.
They're actually based off actual D&D campaigns. So, yeah, it has always been somewhat of a world-embraced game. But I think now, in a lot of ways, we're seeing it hit a new stride because it is hitting all these cultures. There's a lot more sensitivity to how things are being produced. There is a part of Dungeons and Dragons known as Karatur. And Karatur is a loose conglomeration of Asian concepts. There is somewhat of a Japanese analog or two, somewhat of a Chinese analog or two, but they're all just kind of...
you mean? Like specifically like, Buddhism?
No,
like you'll like find a country that is basically, let's just shoehorn Japan into Dungeons.
Yeah, here's some
Dragons.
samurais and ninjas, that's Japan. And
Okay.
they weren't treated with very much sensitivity. They were just kind of like there for well, I mean, if you look at any of the cyberpunk stuff, I don't know if you're looking at the new cyberpunk game coming out in
Cyberpunk
April.
2077, yeah.
Absolutely, that's based literally and actually on a pen and paper role-playing game.
That's true.
Yeah, and there are concepts in that game. A lot of cyberpunk comes from this concept of kind of, it's called Tokyoization, and it's this idea of where you take really cool concepts like ninjas and samurais and stuff like that, and then attribute them over to the West. And luckily, they become caricatures rather than just sort of insulting to the Japanese mindset at this point. Like the idea of a samurai, they use street samurai is what they use in Shadowrun.
Yeah.
A lot of these concepts were treated with not without care. They had some care to them, but they were just so lumped together that there were issues. And I think that's kind of one of the great things we're finding now is they're kind of untangling that web, and they're trying to treat everything with respect. Like Ashley was talking about the Sun Elves. That's the kind of concept that they're trying to push forward now, is this: we can have separate, disparate groups that appeal to everybody. And that's what they really want D&D to feel. I think in France, didn't they just lose their license?
They've got a licensing issue going on in France right now, but they're hoping to have it fixed by January.
For D&D, and that's a big deal because it's like, well, people want to buy players' handbooks, especially around the holidays.
Yeah.
They want to be able to buy these books, but without the licensing issue to have them printed in French, a lot of these people who do not speak English or other languages can't just go and buy a book. They have to buy the translations.
I see. So, Ashley,
and that's a big deal.
I want to ask you this, Ashley, real quickly. Like, in your opinion, do you feel like, somewhat the same way? At least has a lot of the stuff translated well, into like gaming form or any of these other things from like original D&D, or at least, D&D proper?
I feel like the crossover between video game and tabletop role-playing game has always been there. There's always been it. And part of that's coming from the perspective of my first exposure to Dungeons & Dragons was playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Curse of the Azure Bonds on the Commodore 64.
Yeah, there you go.
So the old gold box games were my first exposure to it on the whole. So I've always kind of seen the overlaps. And
back when you didn't have a CD key and you had to look in the manual and solve like a password.
In order to make sure that you had not copied the game, in between chapters, they would tell you to open up the manual and go to a certain page and type in the fourth word on that page.
That's funny. That's such an old thing. I know Carmen Sandiego did that. I know like some of the old Superman games on Commodore 64 used to do that. That's such like an archaic thing now that's gone. But a lot of people don't know that struggle, like having to go like search for the book for it.
One of my favorite parts is one of the old gold box games actually had a translation wheel for like, I think it was like Draconian language. and you had to use the translation wheel to find the right symbol to continue progressing in the game.
That's funny. That's some uber pirate protection right there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, but the cool thing is I still have that translation wheel that still has these old Dragonlance languages on it that I could still pull out and use in D&D today. And that's one of the great things about the evolution of D&D. The rule set has changed, but there's 40 years of depth and lore and tools and creative ideas that you can easily pick up and update. And that's one of the things that a lot of people on the Dungeon Masters Guild where we work really focus on, is taking those old ideas and updating them. Sometimes that means updating mechanically, and sometimes that means updating a thing to not be offensive to a minority group anymore, because nowadays we have people going, hey, this thing's really cool, but that right there's messed up. It's like, okay, we need to fix that.
And that's important. That's a good thing to do. I feel like that helps the game evolve and grow with the times. It doesn't remain, stagnant in its own time frame when it was way back there. But I want to ask you guys this, since we're talking about games right now, what about some of the specific, like you mentioned before, the specific Dungeons and Dragons games? Like recently, for example, I got a chance to check out on the Nintendo Switch the Neverwinter Nights game, or some of the older Dungeons and Dragons games that were originally for Windows, I believe 95 or 98 PC, that got ported over to the Nintendo Switch. Again, there's like a bunch of different expansions of them, so I know I'm encompassing them all together. Do you feel like the game itself has gone translated in a way to the digital realm, to the gaming realm like that? Granted, not so much on the PC, because again, that when you're working with a PC, you have the point and click stuff. So I feel like things that are a little bit more complex could be a little bit much more easily transferred over between mediums. But like going over to consoles and stuff, like for example, the Neverwinter Nights MMO or things like that. Do you feel like those have worked, or at least retained a lot of the fundamental aspects or principles of original D&D?
The biggest issue is math. A computer can solve mathematical problems a heck of a lot faster than people can. And that's one of the reasons why the PC games are so phenomenally fun. You get a lot done. I can sit down at a D&D table and I can run maybe 2 combats, 2-3 hours of story, and we're at the table for 6 hours.
Yeah, you're there for a while.
Because it takes a while. You have to figure out what you're going to do during your turn. I have to roll for monsters. You have to roll for your character. You have to pick your abilities. When you're playing a game, you just click. It does all the math. It does all the rolling. You can see what dice they're rolling on screen, but it does all that for you, so the pace is a lot faster.
What about randomness? What about randomness? Because I know this is a big thing with D&D. Obviously, you're rolling D20s, you're rolling all types of dice and stuff. With computers, do you feel like that's the better way to go about, especially, instances where randomness and, certain percentages have to come into play?
There is something magical about, and it's more the social aspect than the randomness, maybe both of them combined, taking a die and rolling it. Let's say it's oh man, we almost have the big bad beat, somebody's almost dead. It's the barbarian's turn. You pick up your axe, you roll your d20. The entire table is standing and watching that die hit the table. Everyone is excited. All you're doing is rolling a shiny math rock across the table, but this is going to possibly determine the outcome of this fight. So I think having those physical dice on the table and between players is more exciting. That's why I still play D&D. I've played every D&D video game I could get my hands on since they came out. Sometimes when they first came out, the Baldur's Gate series I played very early on.
I can relate to Baldur's Gate because I love Baldur's Gate. I think it's Dark Alliance.
Dark Alliance,
yeah.
They got a new one coming out. That's exciting.
The hack and slash style type of games like that is where my forte is, or at least where I resonate most with it. As opposed to the point and click versions of D&D, because I feel again, it just works for the gamer or the player like me, that I could kind of get into that a little bit more as opposed to everything else. But Ashley, let me ask you: do you feel similar in that same way?
I have a very hard time comparing tabletop Dungeons and Dragons to the video games that are based off of it. To me, to base a video game off of Dungeons and Dragons, even if the underlying scripts of the game are still using 3.5 or 5e rules, to me, it is still a video game and not Dungeons and Dragons. It's kind of like basing a video game off of a movie. You're not watching the movie, you're playing a video game. Because, like he said, that amazing moment where somebody rolls the dice and the whole table's standing on their feet and they cheer, that's glazed over in a video game.
That's very true. It's more the tangible aspect of it, right?
Yeah. So it's to me, the video game has certain outcomes, and there can be randomness in it. You can have random encounters. I don't know if this person's going to be on this road when I walk by. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but the randomness is still contained. There is still a list of things that might happen. Nice. Whereas when I sit down at the table, if I'm the dungeon master, I'm sitting there and I'm watching my players and what they're doing. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know what they're about to do.
You never know.
You never freaking know. I'm like, okay, there is a door in front of you. And they're like, I want to climb out the window. I'm like, what? So now I'm having to figure out what the heck is outside that window. And you don't have that option in the video game. There's a door in front of you. You go click on the window. It doesn't do anything. Okay, I guess I have to go through the door.
It's programmed.
Exactly. So to me, a video game, as I love video games, and this is nothing against video games, but video games are limited. They are what has already been programmed before it was handed to you, whereas Dungeons and Dragons is a living game that is changing as you are playing it.
That's interesting. That's a very interesting concept. I'm curious to see what you guys listening to this are going to think about some of this stuff that we're talking about. Now, one final point I want to kick to both of you guys, before we end off this episode. I want to know, pick one thing that you could think of, as people that are really vexed very well with Dungeons and Dragons. Again, you guys know the insides and outs of it. Tell me one thing for each of you, and I'll start with Isaac, that you wish that Dungeons and Dragons would include, or like one thing that hasn't really kind of, been part of the game yet that you feel like should be moving forward. Now that we're in 5th edition, we're going maybe in the 6th edition or onward. What's something that you feel like should be included in the game?
Oh boy. So I am a huge fan of a setting and kind of concept of D&D known as Spelljammer.
What's Spelljammer?
I love space elves. That's the best way to put it. Space elves. It is a separate setting. It has giant flying spaceships that look more like actual ships, like on the sea. But it also has like these creatures called the Gith, Gith. The Githzerai, Githyanki, and there's so much cool stuff, and it's very far out there. It's not quite fantasy, not quite sci-fi, and somewhere in between, and it deals with a lot of kind of the idea of not traveling through space, but traveling through the astral realm, so a separate plane. I'd love to see them do something with it, but right now they're playing very safe, and I believe they should, because all the settings that are coming out, Ravenloft is spooky Dungeons and Dragons. If you deal with the classic Forgotten Realms, is classic fantasy, like Tolkien fantasy, right?
Nice.
It's easy to pick up, but Spelljammer is just super weird, and that's what I would love to see. I'm excited to see they do something. They just released a book based in Eberron, which is somewhat like steampunk Magitech kind of setting. Really, really cool stuff. They just put that out, so I'm happy they've reached just a bit. And I'm just like, guys, just go up. Go up and hit the stars. We're good.
Cool. What about you, Ashley? Like one thing that you want to see?
So I hate to sound like I'm just going, yeah, what he said, but as writers and creators in D&D, the thing that we always want to see is more settings.
More settings.
Because on the Dungeon Masters Guild, we are licensed to write any setting that Wizards of the Coast has published. So the Forgotten Realms, which like he said is very Tolkien-esque. Ravenloft, which is very kind of Victorian horror with vampires and things like that. They just gave us Eberron, which is Magitech. So as soon as they open something up to us, you're going to see 30 or 40 writers all start creating content for that world. So it's like, just give us a new place. Just give us a new location. Give us Dragonlance. Give us Spelljammer. Give us new worlds to create in. That's always what we're craving.
Something wild and crazy. That'd be kind of cool. Again, because all the different stuff that you guys mentioned, stuff I can only imagine like maybe just somebody sitting there trying to come up with all these concepts of like locations just to mess around with and see like what people come up with. That sounds like a lot of fun, like overall. But Isaac, Ashley, thank you so much for chatting up with me about D&D. You guys are awesome, as always. Always great chatting up with y'all and stuff. Talk to me. Where can everybody find you guys? You guys are on the socials right now?
Yes. I am only really on Twitter at Icy Kinda Dicey.
Icy
Kinda Dicey.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram, both of them under Ashley May Writes.
Awesome. So I'm going to have links down below in the description box for you guys listening now. So you guys can go check them out, send them some love, send us some owl hugs, because we send owl hugs to everybody that comes
I
to
love
the
that.
show. Because again, I love owls, I love squirtles, but owls hugs, it's always a good thing. But thank you again, guys, for chatting up with me about D&D.
Thank you.
We're going to talk more on my EX Mode podcast, again, which is a supplement to my Definitive Discussion show. It's going to be on my Patreon, guys. For the $1 level or higher, you guys get all that bonus content, including this bonus discussion we're going to have in just a second. But let me know what you guys think about this episode. down below in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and of course, I'll see you guys again very soon. From the both of us, or all three of us, I should say now, because it's more than just a pair. You guys come as a package deal. You go, all three of us, we'll talk to you guys again real soon. Peace out. And stay epic, everybody.